At 6:12 on a Saturday morning, I opened my front door and found my mother's memorial tree lying across my lawn. Not trimmed, not damaged by a storm. Cut down, the entire oak tree was on the ground. Its trunk sliced clean near the base, its branches crushed across the flower bed where my mother used to plant marigolds every spring. For a moment, I could not move. I just stood there in my robe. Barefoot on the porch, staring at the stump, there was a white HOA work tag stapled to it. Unapproved vegetation removed. Community View Restoration Project. Community View Restoration. That was what they called cutting down the tree my father planted for my mother the week after she died. And it was not just any oak. It was a protected live oak, registered with the city after the subdivision was built around it. I had the paperwork in my deed packet. The tree was older than every house on the street, older than the hoe, older than the walking trail behind my yard. The city ordinance required a permit, an arborist review, and replacement mitigation before anyone could remove it. The HOA had none of that. I knew, because taped to my mailbox was another notice. Failure to comply with landscape visibility standards may result in additional corrective action. Additional corrective action. They had already cut down a 60-year-old tree. What else were they planning to correct? Then I heard my neighbor, Bryce Holland, laughing from his driveway. He said, "Looks like the view finally opened up." The view. His upstairs balcony now had a clear sightline over my backyard and toward the pond. That was the view he had complained about. For 6 months, he said, my oak blocked shared scenic enjoyment. I said my oak was on my property, protected by city ordinance, and planted as a memorial. He said people used sentiment to avoid rules. By 8 a.m., the police had taken a report. By 9:30, the city arborist was standing over the stump with a tape measure and a face that got colder by the second. By noon, the HOA president was telling neighbors the tree had been dead. Diseased and hazardous, dead. The leaves were still green on the branches lying in my yard, and by Monday the HOA fined me $5,200 for failing to maintain a dangerous tree and for interfering with authorized landscaping crews after the fact. After the fact, they cut down my tree, then fined me for objecting too late, but they made one mistake. My side yard camera had caught everything at 3:48 a.m. It caught the tree crew arriving without city markings. It caught Bryce pointing at my oak. It caught the HOA president signing the work order on the hood of a truck. And it caught the crew lead saying, "This tree has a protection tag." Then Bryce answered, "Take the tag off first." 3 weeks later, the city arborist would read the protected tree ordinance in front of a packed HOA meeting. The tree company would lose its municipal contract eligibility. The HOA's insurer would open a claim. Bryce would be forced to retract his complaint. The president would resign, and that one stump in my yard would cost them $208,000 in tree valuation. Mitigation fees, legal costs, city penalties, property damage, emotional distress settlement, and restoration work. But that morning, with sawdust on my porch steps and my mother's memorial tree cut into sections on the grass, all I knew was this. The HOA had not restored a view, they had erased a memory, and then called it maintenance. My mother loved that tree before it was ours, when my parents bought the lot in Fair Lake Meadows. The neighborhood barely existed. There were only a few framed houses, a muddy road, and one enormous live oak standing near the back corner of what would become our yard. The builder wanted to remove it. My mother said no. She was not loud about it. She was worse. She was calm. My father used to say that when my mother got calm, contractors started checking their contracts. She went to the city, found out the tree was old enough to qualify for protection, and made sure it stayed. The house was shifted slightly on the lot because of her. The patio was smaller than planned because of her. The fence line bent in one place because of her. She loved sitting under that oak in the evenings. When I was a kid, she hung wind chimes from one of the lower branches. When I was in high school, she tied a yellow ribbon there while my brother was deployed. When my father retired, he put a bench beneath it and claimed it was for my mother, even though he was the one who napped there. After she died, my father planted a ring of marigolds around the base every spring. He said the tree already belonged to her, so he was just keeping the room tidy when Dad passed away 6 years later. The house came to me. I did not move in right away. I had an apartment closer to work, and the grief was too fresh. But eventually, the house stopped feeling like a museum and started feeling like a place I could breathe again. The oak helped. It made shade over the back windows. It held cardinals in winter. It dropped leaves in exactly the wrong places and acorns that nearly killed my ankles every October. It was inconvenient in all the ways. Living things are inconvenient. I loved it anyway. The city had records on it. My deed packet included a protected tree notice, an old arborist assessment, and a subdivision condition stating that the oak could not be removed without city approval. The HOA architectural guidelines even mentioned it in a section about preserved natural features. For years, no one bothered it. Then Bryce Holland moved in behind me. Bryce bought the biggest house on the curve, the one with the balcony facing the pond. He was in commercial real estate, which he mentioned more often than necessary. He liked words like optimization, view corridor, asset value, and obstruction. At first he was friendly. Then he asked whether I had considered trimming my oak. I told him. I trimmed dead limbs when needed with a certified arborist, he said. He meant thinning the canopy to improve sightlines. I said the canopy was the tree. He laughed like I had made a small, charming mistake. A month later, I received my first HOA notice. The tree canopy was allegedly interfering with community visual harmony and shared pond visibility. I replied with the protected tree documents. Then Bryce submitted photos from his balcony, showing branches blocking part of his pond view. The HOA asked me to attend a landscape committee review. I went. The HOA president, Valerie Sloan, sat at the front table with Bryce and 2 committee members. Valerie was the kind of person who spoke softly while doing hard things to other people, she said. The board respected my emotional attachment to the tree, but had to balance individual sentiment with community standards. Individual sentiment. That was my mother. That was my father. That was 60 years of shade and memory and city protection reduced to sentiment. I told them again that the tree was protected. Valerie said the HOA would consult professionals. I said, any professional needed city permits before touching it. Bryce leaned back and said, "You keep using that protected word like it makes the tree untouchable." I said legally. "It makes removal very difficult." He smiled. Difficult isn't impossible. That was the moment I started saving everything: emails, notices, photos, meeting summaries, tree reports, city records. Because when people start talking about your property like an obstacle, you need proof before they act like you imagined the warning signs. 2 weeks before the tree came down, I scheduled a small family gathering for my mother's birthday. Nothing big, just my brother, his wife, my niece, a few cousins, and coffee under the oak. We were going to plant marigolds like Dad used to. I mentioned it in an email to Valerie because I wanted the HOA to stop scheduling tree reviews near that date. She did not reply. Bryce did. He wrote, "Maybe after the gathering. We can finally move forward." I should have understood then. He did not plan to wait the night before the tree was cut. I was inside making a grocery list for the memorial gathering. Marigolds, coffee, lemon cake, paper cups. My mother would have hated paper cups, but I was not my mother. I do not own 12 matching mugs for unexpected cousins. At 10:30 p.m., I walked outside with a flashlight and looked at the oak. I do not know why. Maybe because grief has rituals even when you do not name them. The tree was fine. The city protection tag was still attached near the lower trunk. The leaves were full. The marigold bed was freshly weeded. The bench underneath had been cleaned. I touched the bark once before going inside. At 3:48 a.m., the side yard camera activated. A white bucket truck rolled slowly along the service lane behind my fence, with its lights off until it reached the rear gate. A second pickup followed. Bryce came through the pedestrian gate first, wearing a baseball cap and carrying a flashlight. Valerie arrived. 3 minutes later, she was holding a folder. The tree crew entered my yard through the back gate. My back gate. On my property, not the HOA common area, not Bryce's yard, mine. The crew lead shined his flashlight on the trunk and stopped. The camera audio was not perfect, but it caught enough, he said. This tree has a protection tag, Bryce said. Take the tag off first. The crew lead said something about permits. Valerie stepped in and said, the HOA has authority under hazard abatement. Hazard abatement. At 4:07 a.m. one of the workers removed the tag. At 4:19 the chainsaw started. I slept through it. That is the part I still hate. I slept through my mother's tree being cut down because my bedroom was on the other side of the house and the windows were closed against the summer humidity. By 5:36, the trunk was on the ground. By 5:58, the trucks were gone. They left the stump, the branches, sawdust, crushed marigolds, and the HOA work tag. When I opened the door at 6:12, the whole world looked wrong. Trees change space when they fall. The sky was too big, the yard was too bright. Bryce's balcony, which I had barely noticed before, suddenly stared straight into my backyard like an eye. My brother arrived 20 minutes later, because I called him before I called anyone official. He stood in the yard, looked at the stump, and said nothing. That scared me more than if he had yelled. Then Bryce spoke from his driveway. Looks like the view finally opened up. My brother turned toward him. I put a hand on his arm and said, "Don't," not because Bryce did not deserve anger. Because I wanted records more than regret, I called the police non-emergency line and reported unauthorized entry and property damage. Then I called the city arborist office. Then I called my attorney, who had helped me years earlier with probate paperwork. The HOA moved fast, too. By noon, Valerie had emailed the neighborhood. A hazardous and non-compliant tree was removed this morning as part of ongoing view restoration and safety work. The board understands some residents may have emotional reactions, but the action was necessary. Emotional reactions. Necessary. The leaves were still green. The tag was missing. The stump was bleeding sap. Then the fine arrived. Failure to maintain hazardous vegetation, interference with HOA contractors, failure to cooperate with landscape visibility standards. 5,200. I read it under the empty sky where the oak used to be, and for the first time that morning I stopped crying. My attorney's name was Malcolm Reed. He was usually gentle, the kind of lawyer who made probate feel less like drowning in forms, but when I sent him the camera footage, his voice changed. He said, "Do not let anyone remove another piece of that tree." So I did not one branch, not one log, not one pile of sawdust. Malcolm sent preservation letters that afternoon to the HOA, Valerie, Bryce, the tree company, the management company, the HOA attorney, and the city. He demanded work orders, board approvals, hazard reports, arborist assessments, permit applications, contractor communications, gate access records, photos, text messages, and all complaints related to the tree. Then the city arborist arrived. Her name was Denise Alvarez. She wore work boots, carried a measuring tape, and had the expression of someone who had seen too many people confuse landscaping preference with permission. She measured the stump diameter. 42 inches. She examined the cut. Fresh. She inspected the leaves. Healthy. She looked at the missing tag mark on the bark and asked where the protection tag had been. I showed her old photos. Then I showed her the footage. She watched Bryce say, "Take the tag off first." Her jaw tightened. Not dramatically. Professionally, that somehow made it worse. Denise pulled the city record on the tree. It had been registered as a protected live oak when the subdivision was approved. Removal required a city permit, arborist justification, mitigation calculation, and approval. Emergency removal could occur only if the tree posed immediate danger, and even then documentation had to be submitted. There was no permit, no hazard finding, no city inspection, no emergency call, no arborist report, nothing. The HOA had treated a protected tree like an overgrown hedge. Denise issued a stop work and violation notice immediately. The city opened an enforcement file against the HOA, the tree company, and any party who authorized removal. Then Malcolm hired an independent certified arborist. His report was devastating. The oak showed no visible signs of fatal disease. The canopy was alive. The trunk had no hollow core visible at the cut. There was no evidence of imminent failure. The removal appeared to have been performed for view clearance rather than safety. View clearance. Exactly what Bryce wanted. The tree company tried to defend itself by producing a work order. The work order said, "Remove hazardous oak obstructing pond view. HOA approved. Access through rear gate. Complete before resident event." Before resident event. My Mother S. Memorial. Malcolm looked at that line for a long time. Then he said, "That was not an accident." The HOA emails proved it. Bryce had written to Valerie, "If this waits until after her memorial, the optics get worse. She will make it emotional." Valerie replied, "Agreed. Complete before Saturday. Use hazard language. Use hazard language." Then a committee member asked, "Do we need city tree approval?" Valerie replied, "The tree is inside the HOA community and presents safety concerns. We can address paperwork after removal." After removal. People love doing illegal things first and calling paperwork a future detail. Then Malcolm found the gate issue. The service lane behind my property belonged to the HOA, but my rear gate did not. The tree crew entered my yard through that gate. Bryce had a spare key because the previous owner had once given it to him for a fence repair before I inherited the house. He never returned it. That made the case even uglier. Unauthorized entry, protected tree removal, false hazard claim, HOA fine after the fact, retaliatory enforcement, and intentional interference with a family memorial. The city scheduled a public enforcement hearing. Valerie tried to argue it should be handled privately because emotions were high. Denise' response was simple. Protected tree violations are public. For once, the entire neighborhood was going to hear the story without HOA edits. The legal twist was almost painful in its simplicity. The tree was protected. The tree was alive. The HOA had no permit. That was the whole case. Everything else made it worse. Denise explained the ordinance in plain language. A protected live oak over a certain diameter could not be removed just because a homeowner wanted a better view or an HOA preferred a different landscape appearance before removal. The city required an application, certified arborist evaluation, reason for removal, mitigation plan, and approval. Unauthorized removal triggered penalties based on trunk size, tree value, mitigation requirements, and enforcement costs. 42 inches made the penalty serious. The independent arborist valuation made it worse. Live oaks of that size are not replaceable in any meaningful sense. You can plant a new tree, but you cannot plant 60 years of shade. You cannot plant the ecosystem value, the canopy, the root structure, the history, the temperature reduction, the habitat, or the privacy it provided. The HOA tried to claim the tree was hazardous. Malcolm asked for the hazard report. They had none. They claimed residents had complained about falling branches. The only documented complaints were from Bryce about his pond view. They claimed the tree was affecting community standards. Malcolm produced the HOA guideline section identifying preserved natural features, including my oak. They claimed the contractor made the removal decision. The contractor produced the HOA work order and Valerie's signature. They claimed I had failed to maintain the tree. Malcolm produced my arborist trimming invoices from the prior 3 years. Then he showed the green leaves lying on the ground in city photos. That image did more than argument could. A dead tree does not have that many healthy leaves. Then Denise presented the camera still, Bryce pointing Valerie, holding the folder, the crew lead beside the trunk. The timestamp. 3:48 a.m. No legitimate hazard abatement happens quietly before dawn, with the complaining neighbor holding a flashlight and the HOA president telling people to use hazard language. The tree company's owner tried to apologize. Denise asked whether his crew saw the protection tag. He said yes. She asked whether they removed it. He said one of the crew members did, at the direction of the party on site. Bryce stared at the floor. That was the first smart thing he had done. Malcolm updated the demand letter. He demanded withdrawal of the $5,200 fine, public correction of the false hazard claim, payment for tree valuation, city mitigation fees, property restoration, privacy screening, legal fees, emotional distress tied to the memorial interference. security upgrades, and written HOA policy changes requiring permit verification before any tree work on private property. He also demanded Bryce return every key, remote, and access device connected to my property. Bryce's attorney responded first. That told me he was scared. The HOA's insurer responded second. That told me they were even more scared, because once the city confirmed no permit and no hazard finding, this was no longer a neighborhood disagreement. It was a protected tree violation with video evidence. The city enforcement hearing was held in a municipal meeting room with bad carpet and excellent microphones. I sat beside Malcolm. My brother sat behind me. Bryce sat across the aisle with his attorney. Valerie sat with the HOA lawyer, looking smaller than she had ever looked at HOA meetings. Denise Alvarez presented first. She showed the protected tree record, then the city ordinance, then the stump measurement, 42 inches, then the lack of permit. No application, no approval, no emergency authorization, no hazard documentation. Then she showed the photos, the stump, the green canopy on the ground, the missing protection tag mark, the crushed marigold bed. Then Malcolm played the video. The room watched Bryce enter my yard, the tree crew follow. Valerie signed the work order. The crew leads say, "This tree has a protection tag." Bryce answer, "Take the tag off first." I heard someone behind me inhale sharply, then Malcolm showed the emails. Use hazard language. Complete before Saturday, we can address paperwork after removal. The hearing officer asked Valerie whether she had contacted the city before authorizing the work. Valerie said she believed the HOA had authority to address safety issues. The hearing officer asked if she had a safety report. She did not. He asked Bryce whether he had complained about the tree blocking his view. Bryce's attorney told him not to answer beyond the documents. The documents answered for him. The city issued penalties and mitigation requirements against the HOA and tree company. Bryce was named as a contributing complainant and on-site participant, which mattered in the civil settlement later. The HOA had to pay city fines, mitigation fees, and submit a restoration plan prepared by a certified arborist. The tree company was suspended from eligibility for certain municipal tree work pending review. Then came the HOA meeting. That one was louder. Residents were angry for different reasons. Some were angry the tree was cut. Some were angry the HOA exposed them to financial liability. Some were angry because they had believed Valerie's email calling the tree hazardous, and now they felt used. Denise attended and explained the ordinance again. She said, "Protected means protected from everyone, including HOAs." Malcolm presented the timeline, my warning emails, the memorial date, Bryce's view complaints, Valerie's use hazard language email, the 3:48 a.m. footage, the missing permit, the 5,200 fine. When he read the fine out loud, people actually groaned, because even people who dislike trees understand how ugly it is to cut one down and then fine the owner for the stump. Valerie resigned that night, she said. The controversy had become a distraction, my brother whispered. So was the chainsaw. I almost laughed for the first time in weeks. The settlement took 5 months. The final documented resolution reached $208,000. The largest part was not lumber, it was tree valuation, city mitigation fees, replacement planting, long-term arborist care, privacy restoration, property repair, legal fees, insurance administration, security upgrades, emotional distress settlement tied to the memorial disruption, and penalties related to the unauthorized removal of a protected tree. The HOA withdrew every violation. Bryce issued a written retraction, saying the tree had not been proven dead, diseased, or hazardous before removal, and that his prior statements about view obstruction had contributed to the dispute. The HOA adopted a new tree policy. No tree work on private property. No tree work near protected natural features. No removal based on view complaints. No hazard language without certified arborist documentation. No contractor access to private lots without written owner permission. No exception. The policy came too late for my oak, but not too late for every other tree standing under an HOA with a chainsaw budget and an ego problem. The yard is brighter now. I hate that. People tell you sunlight is good. They say the grass will grow better. They say I can plant something new. They say trees have lifespans, as if that makes a stump easier to look at. They mean well, mostly, but no new tree replaces an old one. A young live oak now grows near the place where my mother's tree stood. The city arborist helped choose it. The mitigation plan required several additional trees, soil care, irrigation, and years of monitoring. The HOA paid for all of it. I signed the planting plan, but I refuse to call it replacement. It is not. It is a beginning. Those are different things. My family still held the memorial. Just later we stood around the stump instead of under the canopy. My niece placed marigolds in a circle around it. My brother brought one of Dad's old coffee mugs and set it on the bench. Nobody said much. There are some losses you do not fill with speeches. I kept the stump for a while. Not because it was pretty, because it was evidence. After the case closed, I had a section of the trunk cut and sealed. It sits in my garage now. Heavy and smooth, with rings you can count if you have the patience. My mother would have run her hand over it and said something gentle. My father would have said someone owed us a hell of a lot more than money. Both would have been right. Bryce moved the next spring. His listing described the property as having open pond views. I hope every person who toured it asked why. The new HOA board is careful around trees now. Maybe because they respect them. Maybe because 208,000 made respect financially convenient. I do not care which reason keeps the chainsaws away. I kept a folder labeled Oak. Inside were the protected tree record, city ordinance, my arborist invoices, HOA notices, warning emails, camera stills, Bryce S. retraction, Denise S. violation report, the settlement statement, and one printed image from 3:48 a.m. Bryce pointing. Valerie signing, the tree crew, standing under leaves they had no right to cut. I kept it because property damage is not always just damage to things. Sometimes it is damage to memory, to shade, to privacy, to the place where your father sat after your mother died because grief needed somewhere to rest. So if your HOA, neighbor, developer, landscaper, or board ever threatens a tree on your property, especially an old one, do not assume common sense will protect it. Check your city ordinance, look for protected tree records, save arborist reports, photograph tags, keep emails. Watch for words like hazard, nuisance, view corridor, and restoration. Those words can be real. They can also be camouflage. And if someone says paperwork can wait until after removal, understand this. After removal is too late for the tree, but not too late for accountability. If this story made you think of someone who needs to hear it, share it with them. Leave your thoughts in the comments, save the video, and subscribe for more stories about ordinary homeowners who learned that HOAs do not get to turn memories into landscaping waste. Because I did not beat them by planting another tree. I beat them by proving the first one was never theirs to cut, and every spring now when marigolds bloom around the young oak, I look at the empty space above it and remember the shade that used to be there. They opened Bryce's view, but they exposed themselves, and that cost them far more than they ever imagined.